Hey, Jonathan,
Hey there.
Hello.
and everyone else.
Hello,
Oh,
Gavin. Hello, Dan. Great to see you guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to pull up your deck. While I'm doing that, though, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? I explained your roles, but there's much more to you than just your titles, of course. So, Gavin, why don't we start with you? Why don't you introduce yourself?
sure. My name's Gavin Stone. I'm product lead specifically around RMM at NinjaOne. My background, specifically because we're talking about automation, I was the CTO for an MSP for 15 years and drove a lot of automation while I was there. Learnt a lot as well. Dan?
Yep, thanks, Gavin. My name is Dan Myers. I'm a product manager here at NinjaOne and specifically around our backup product that we've built in-house. So, I've been a product manager here for about a year. But before that, I also, like Gavin, was in the MSP world. I was the eventual head of a centralized services team. So that had to do with everything RMM, tool deployment related, patching, backup. But we also built an automation team to help drive forward value in other areas of the organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned and some of the strategies that we've encountered along the way, and looking forward to it here.
All right, guys. Well, here, I'll let you get to it. I'll drive a little bit, so just yell at me when you want me to move forward.
Oh, I'm good at yelling, so no problem. Well, let's start with our next slide here, because I think this helps us get started in a pretty good way here. Bill Gates has a quote that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. Automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. And I think this sets the stage fairly well, because automation is a great tool to help your business, but done ineffectively will often have a negative impact and leave you wondering why it didn't work, or thinking that automation isn't for you. Gavin, you've got a similar Bill Gates quote, though, to share, right?
I do, and it's my favorite Bill Gates quote 'cause it ties into automation. Something along the lines of, I choose a lazy person to do a hard job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it. And sometimes, Dan, I am that lazy person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, absolutely. It certainly does help. All right. Well, let's go through the outline today of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start by asking the why. Why should we automate? Exploring some workshop questions to get your brain driving forward early in the morning today, and see how we should be considering our topic today. We're going to look at how to get started. And you might expect us to come in and tell you what to automate. That's not exactly what we're going for today. We want to provide examples and ideas, but the largest purpose of this talk today is help empower you and your teams to be able to want to automate hours of repetitive, error-prone tasks. And so we're going to help you learn how to get started here. Almost more important than 1 and 3, though, is number 2, understanding the pitfalls to avoid, helping reinforce the right things to automate, and understanding where it might go wrong that could lead to a really negative experience. And having learned these first 2 areas and started thinking about them, we're going to drive towards, what does it look like to build a culture of automation? How can you create a system that provides you the best chance of success for a long-lasting, team effort that will help on this? All right. So why should we automate? And go ahead and hit that button one more time here, Jonathan, for my lazy animations. Thanks. I want you to help answer the question of why automate. I want you to think of some answers to these bullet points. I want you to think of your most common ticket type. What's your most annoying ticket that you work on? Your most time-consuming tasks on that one customer that seems to really be eating at your MRR. What do you think it costs your business to have to work repetitively on this work? Do you think you could spend your time elsewhere if you didn't have to do some of these things? So Gavin, where else should we be thinking about when we're asking the why of an automation question here?
Well, yeah, and it's a good question. It's like I said, looking at ticketing types and things like that are important. But one of the things that I found really help is listening to even your colleagues, if you're sat in the office or if you're working remotely on a meeting. What are they complaining about? Because one thing I found when trying to get traction in automation is there are good questions and bad questions to answer, to ask when you're talking about why automate. If you go up to somebody and say, what do you want to automate? And if anyone's ever done that at my previous company, and I'm sure many of yours, you'll get blank looks, some people saying, I don't know. Whereas if you rephrase that question and ask something like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis that you really don't like doing or annoys you? You're likely to get a much different question. People don't inherently look at things like that, Dan, as automation. They look at it as more annoyances, but it ties into the reason why you would want to automate in the first place.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of where we want to start, go ahead and hit that slide. I bet you a lot of I bet you some of you answered those questions with fairly complex or fairly large scale problems that your organization thinks about. And it's a great place to start, but I want to recommend approaching automation in a slightly different approach. Think about automating the easy stuff first. What can you do behind the scenes to first test if you're even ready to involve more people in an automation process? What monitoring and alerting tasks can you drive? Do they drive a high volume of tickets for you that you could look at automating? Ideally, what you're looking to do when even verifying that automation is right for your organization is start small. We're looking for quick wins, quick returns on smaller investment to really make sure that you're ready. We're going to talk a bit more in the pitfall section, but if you start hitting some of those answers that you were probably considering on the why automate, and you go for the big ones right off the bat, you're going to have a tough time at it. So it's really important to set yourself up for success and start small and look for some quick wins.
And that's a really good point, Dan. And one thing I'd like to make about when you're thinking what you should automate first, what is that easy stuff? It starts with measurement. Automation always starts with measuring, whether that's measuring how many tickets you're getting, measuring the time it takes to perform a certain type of action, or measuring how long it takes to go through your processes. When you're thinking about what to automate first, you should always start by measuring the things that you think you should automate. That does two things, and one we'll touch on later. But the first thing that does is it gives you a list of where is a good place to start. You can pick out that easy automation first, and you can also hit something that is potentially taking a long time. But the second thing that does is that sets you up for success down the line in making sure that you're not over rotating on the first things that you're doing. And by measuring the impact at the start and at the end, you can tie that to definitive measurables that people like the CEO can understand, or the CFO, or whoever's in your organization, to say, we explicitly did this and it saved X amount of time, X amount of money, which we'll touch on shortly.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. So as we transition and continue talking about the easy stuff here, so we've got a bit of a nice graph to help you understand where you would want to start. So whenever you're considering an automation, a script to write, an automation to create, really you want to start by trying to measure the impact you think it will make and the amount of work you will be required. This is where we talk about trying to find those easy wins up front. You're looking for that big red box there, that low effort, but high reward. And making sure you remember that a lot of times as your automation technicians or technicians that are interested in automation, your job is to convince your stakeholders and your higher ups that this is a good idea to invest your time in. And the best way to do that is setting yourself up for success, choosing those right things to automate, proving, hey, boss, I went and made sure that all of our, server low disk space tickets that we get 20 a week, I automated a disk cleanup script, and now we're saving 2 hours a week. And by being able to prove where you're making the gains, proving with some really easy and quick wins, you're going to start planting the seeds to get more funding or get more people involved. Then you're going to start getting the go ahead to try and tackle those high effort and high reward topics in the future. One of the things that I created when I was in the MSP world was, and this is about 6 years now, 5-6 years ago, was a Windows upgrade script. And, back then, it was very difficult to go to the from major version to major version. It's gotten a lot better over the last 6 versions, but before that, it was difficult to handle. And so I probably spent a good 100 to 200 hours over time creating this script. It would open a ticket. It would document where it was at. It would check for enough disk space to download the ISO. It downloaded the ISO. It verified it was, and it kept updating the ticket where it was at, because sometimes this process still took days, overnight. It would have to try multiple nights in a week. And, over time, I continued to iterate, improve, make it safer, make it have more checks and balances. Over time, I mean, we had 5,000, 4,000 Windows 10 machines, and everyone needed to upgrade once or twice a year. And that manually would have taken someone an hour each to sit there and make sure that it did what it needed to do, rebooted, it checked back in. And so I can say that we saved thousands of hours over time by handling this. And it was a high effort and high reward, but I never would have been able to start out in this manner had I not had the background, had I not shown that I've gotten buy-in, that I can prove that automation is worth investing in. So to sum this up here, it's really making sure that you're targeting that effort and reward for every automation that you're taking. So Gavin, you have something else to share on this too, right?
I absolutely did. Just before I touch on this, Dan, I want to comment on your Windows upgrade story, because I think that's a great representation of really the entire process that we're talking about today, and how like some of the pitfalls of that. It's obviously a pretty high risk script. It's a high difficulty to code something like that. And if you jump into that straight away, you are definitely going to have problems, because for those who have, and our organization, my previous organization, was one of the ones who also scripted that. If you get that wrong, it goes wrong pretty spectacularly. And it requires a lot of upkeep and maintenance and skill to keep going. And I think that illustrates that high effort, high reward as being like that final stage. And it's a good example, I think, of automation that is difficult to do, but really does have a high reward at the end. So some of you may have seen this before, and this is an XKCD comic that helps you look at whether automating something is actually worth your time. So the values that you've seen here in the middle represent a period across 5 years. Down the left-hand side is how much time you would shave off by automating. And at the top is how often you do that particular task, whether you do it daily, weekly. And the middle shows you, when you map it out, how much time you actually save over 5 years if you were to automate that task. One of the things I found, and I've spent years having conversations with many people who were doing automation, people who are good power automators, including me. I have a little bit of a disease, I think, where the more that they automate, the less that they take this into account. And especially when you don't like being beaten by something. If you're trying to script and automate something, it's easy to put 6 hours into something that maybe saves you 5 minutes over the course of a month, and before you know it, you spent an entire day automating a 5-minute process that you've lost all of those time gains. And ironically, the more experienced people are, I think the less they like to be beaten by not being able to automate something. So that's something worth bearing in mind as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've gotten started. The idea of this is you've gotten started, and hopefully you've learned some things from what we've shared today, and you could go back and implement this. So what would the next steps kind of look like? You're ready to branch out into other territories that are not so behind the scenes. You might want to expand the list of opportunities to automate and involve other departments like a service desk or first responders. At this stage, this is where you can sort of get your giant list created. And I highly recommend doing this. Create a list of anything and everything that you think you could ever automate. No idea is off the table. And there's a lot of value in seeking these questions from others as well. Like, involve your help desk, involve other people that may not be doing the automation, but are doing the work. And if you can get all of your ideas, and you can start using that matrix that we looked at earlier and say, what is the lowest effort for the highest reward here? What does that actually look like? But there is a ton of value in looking for everything that you could automate so that you could sort of set what is the most important thing that we should be automating here in the organization. It's a great second step to take after really getting started.
Thanks, Dan. I want to talk a little bit about, particularly for this slide, actually, how do you actually go about getting buy-in in your organization? Because one of the things that I found was, when you're really excited about automation and you really enjoy scripting and you love building things like this and saving the company time, money, saving yourself and your colleagues time and money, and you have that passion for automation, sometimes it can be like hitting a steel wall when you speak to someone who doesn't particularly seem as interested or as kind of motivated for you to sort that problem. And I think a lot of that is about making sure that you're talking in the same language as your audience. Most of the people, especially in a normal organization, do not really care too much when it comes to automation. And I think that's important to understand when you're talking to different people. And when you're trying to get buy-in, adjust what you are saying depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to your CEO or your CFO or the people who deal with the money side of your business, talk about the cost savings. Talk about how, if I automate this particular process, this will save us $20,000 or pounds a year. When you are talking to your technicians or your colleagues, or engineering people in your business, talk about efficiency and productivity. Talk about how it saves them time. Talk about how it is less likely to make what they are doing error prone. This will help you because it reduces the amount of errors that you are likely to make if you are doing a process again and again. Talk about consistency and quality, how it will help build and deliver a better service overall to the clients. And when you're talking to people who are analyzing or making decisions in the business, talk about data collections and insights, because automation can give some great collection of data if you do it right and you measure it right, and insights into how the business is running over time, how well it's doing, even financially, based on automations that you're putting in. And when you tie all of those areas together and start to improve some of your processes in the business, that's when automation really can start to help to ramp up.
Yeah. What really stands out to me is this buy-in, and it needs buy-in from across the organization. And it transitions to what I think really is the most important part of this talk today, is understanding some of the pitfalls to avoid. When you're starting out in automation, why it's so important to pick what we've been talking about of smaller behind the scenes items, and why it's important to get buy-in. If you don't have a plan, if you're tackling some of those ideas that maybe you were answering in the why should you automate that were the high effort and high reward, biting off more than you can chew here and immediately involving a lot of departments, when you're just first getting started out, you're going to have a tough time. You're going to be setting yourself up for a risky scenario. And why it's usually important to get the buy-in is because many people have had bad experiences with automation. Many leaders and managers might not be convinced. Even though I was in a very mature MSP, there were always times where it felt like it was difficult to get more people into the proactive side, because we always thought we were in this reactive spiral of tickets that had to always be worked, right? So it is important, if you're going to get people to try and change that pattern of the reactive tickets, you've got to make sure you're handing the automations correctly. So I want to share a story from my MSP days that I think really highlights this well. It was probably about 6 years ago, and our organization created a new automation team. They called it the proactive team, and their job was to go tackle very difficult problems and solve them from the organization. So we had a front-end web developer, a scripter, and a leader that was there to help find the right things to do. Well, they chose to create a new user creation script. And it would link with all of our organizations and create the username in the proper format and make sure that it had the proper email inbox created, and it would be part of the correct groups. And, which user should we copy from, to make this new user? We found that this was an area that we struggled with in setting our clients up for success. We had 90 clients and they all had a different username format, right? And this one client, they did first name dot last name when almost 80-90% were, first initial last name. And we screwed it up every time. No amount of checklists or documentation could fix us from shooting ourselves in the foot, apparently. And it happens with a level of repetition that you go through in the life of an MSP and day-to-day ticket work. So they set out to do this. And there's a lot going on here, right? Making sure that this works for all of the organizations. Some are Azure AD joined, or some were, Office 365 linked. Some had on-prem Exchange, some didn't. And what ended up happening is we chose a really difficult item and we pushed it out to people. We made these massive campaigns. Use this. We have to use this. You must use this because we've proven to ourselves we can't be trusted with it. And the messaging here is just as important as the automation and the campaigns to get people to use it. So we got people to use it, and it had problems. It had problems with certain organizations, with certain types of interfaces. I mean, some of it wasn't even coded properly. We actually got someone's username format wrong, which is the whole dang point of this entire thing. And this group was not prepared for that, and they hadn't expected that, and they were slow to iterate, slow to recover. There were personnel problems. The scripter didn't like doing the same thing. He just wanted to go do other stuff. And so now what we had done is we created this major effort automation. We'd forced people to use it, and they lost trust. They stopped using it, or they used it and never got feedback of something's not working right. And so we started making more mistakes. But the main takeaway of this is the customers. the help desk people that were supposed to be using this didn't trust the automation. And this was this team's first automation that they put out. And it just left a horrible taste in everyone's mouth. And people were left going, one, I don't trust these people. I don't trust these scripts that they wrote. But they said, automation isn't for us. Like this is too much. And in reality, they broke all these pitfalls. They didn't have a plan to handle continuous iteration. Your scripts are not just done when you release them to a group of people. It's very important to, take the feedback given. And so years later, when I wanted to create an automation team, I had an uphill battle, a real uphill battle. And I had to overdo it. Yeah, I had to over rotate on my customer service to the help desk. It was a good experience. I made sure that when we created an automation, every single step along the way had a check and balance. I knew before they did at times that the script failed, and we were able to reach out to people within minutes and say, it looks like you had a problem. I'm here to help. What did you see? Or I could even tell what the problem was. And it took a lot of work, but we were able to build some of that trust back. But, it would have been a lot easier if we had worked on something small and brought it to market with our internal teams rather than trying the biggest thing in the world. That script still doesn't work to this day. And it's basically been abandoned now. But that's my story on really making sure to avoid some of the pitfalls here. I mean, Gavin, what do you take away from that story? Have you experienced anything similar?
Yeah, plenty of times. And I think Michael makes a really good point actually in the chat, which is you have to test and verify any of the automations that you are doing constantly, either in code and manually. So I would occasionally go back to automations and do the process manually again to make sure there wasn't anything new there, or I hadn't missed something, to make sure it was still working, especially in those more complex automations, Dan. But people really do lose confidence if they have a bad experience with an automation, and that's why the feedback cycle is so important, and making sure that you do these things slowly. You don't jump into huge things unnecessarily. You take it a step at a time. One of the things I was definitely guilty of several times was going for perfection the first time instead of going for something that was stable and more easier to build in a script. I'd want it to have all the bells and whistles and do everything and be super complicated. But make sure that when you've put an automation in place, you get feedback from your colleagues. They are unlikely, at least in my experience, going to proactively provide that feedback. And that ties into my story, Dan. This wasn't even a complex automation. This was an automation that was written that when you run installed some applications using Nanite, which is it's a relatively simple script. And one of the things that I used to do when I was CTO of the previous MSP is I'd like to shadow the workers, sit with them, help them, watch what they're doing, see how the process is working, and if they've got any problems with that. And one day I was sat next to one of the guys who was prepping up some of our PCs to go out in the previous company. And he was installing these applications manually. And I said to him, do you not know we've got a script to do this? You can just go here and just click it and it will do all this. And he turned around and said, yeah, but it only works like 60% of the time. And I didn't know that. And when he said that to me, I went back into the script and saw that 2017 Gavin was bad at a particular line that I coded, and I fixed it. But I had no idea because I hadn't solicited that feedback up until that point, and I just assumed that it worked correctly. And yeah, losing confidence is not great on those complex automations. So take the staging properly, take the testing properly, and make sure you test and verify.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, having understood what these pitfalls to avoid might look like, what does it look like to build a culture of automation here? Um, there are some important things to think about as you're working on this. So, we've talked about today really working on getting buy-in from management. We've talked about the ways to look at how to be successful there, but it's not just above you, it is at your level and below, so to speak, right? Getting buy-in from the rest of the team that this is valuable and important, making them a part of the process is really important. But not just getting buy-in, plan. What are you actually trying to accomplish here? Are you just automating for the sake of automating? Because what's your goals? What are your results? But if you're saying, boy, we really have a hard time keeping up with our documentation, can we automate 3 hours back in our week so that we can focus time on that? Having a plan is important when you're doing any of this. For the people, find and nurture an automation evangelist. You all probably, many of it are probably you, right? And if it is you, seek support from your manager. Like, I'm really interested in this, and I think it can do X, Y, Z for us, and I'd like some assistance so that I can try 1, 2, 3. Can you help me with that? Get some buy-in, get some help for that, but also empower others that show an interest in this. And there's a lot of opportunity here to gamify automation when you're ready for it, right? Don't start out with this. But, who's running the most scripts? Who's presenting the most ideas? When we talked about building our list of ideas, I mean, we made a massive campaign with our service desk people. They're the ones that are actually doing the work all day, every day. Not to say that we're not doing work too, but, what we were doing is saying, hey, whoever has the best idea, the top 3 ideas, gets $250 Amazon gift card, and you get to join the meetings and help discuss the different phases, the different iterations, the important features. How should it run? How should it work? And then to really set us back here, you've got to measure and track your results. You have to make sure that you are keeping up, and how can you prove that it actually provided the value that you expected? Gavin, what else are you thinking about when you're trying to build a longer term culture for automating?
I really like the gamification of this. If you make it a game, you're much more likely to get people involved in what you're doing. But I do think the end goal here, once you become more mature in building up a culture of automation, is that you should start to insert automation directly into your business processes. They should become a part of everything the business looks at and everything the business does from day one. But the key there is that you only want to do that when you are in that high effort, high reward stage, not at the beginning, because you will fall into the pitfalls that we talked about if you do that. But the kind of like the end stages of those automations, when you've got your measuring and you're going through that cycle, is to start putting the automation directly into your business processes. And that's like towards the end of the maturity scale for implementing automation. But building the culture, the gamification really worked well at our old company. And we did similar to what you did, Dan. We had contests for the best ideas. And we even allowed people to put in ideas anonymously, just in case there was something that they really didn't like, but weren't comfortable bringing forward. Yeah.
So over time, this becomes a process. This becomes a full cycle, and we're running out of time, so we'll finish up here on a couple of things. Really, this here is to indicate and illustrate that this is a continuous process. You come up with an idea, you build and test it, and you put it into production, but you're tracking the results. But it doesn't end there. Seeking feedback and continuing to build that trust and iterate is so super important. I want to go to the next slide here and then turn it over to Gavin for a couple of ideas. I don't, we're not going to go over all of these, but like take a screenshot of this. This is to help get your brain flowing about what are some automation ideas. How can you, get people involved and show some of these ideas to help get started. Gavin, why don't you bring us home here?
Sure. If you could go to the next slide, please, Jonathan. So what you are looking at here is probably a great example of some of that feedback loop that we were talking about. And I love, by the way, that people are talking about MDT in the chat, because this actually fed one of the checks that are in here, which I'll come back to in a minute. In my previous MSP, we had big problems initially with when PCs went out to clients. They'd go out, they were either missing something, they were misconfigured, a setting was missed, or something was configured in a way that it shouldn't be. What you're actually looking at here is the output of an automated quality control check script. Now, this quality control check script had many different tests in it, which you're seeing here, that ran for every PC that was sold by my previous MSP. It would, whenever anyone thought that we'd finished the process, we would run this and make sure every single test was passing. And what actually built this up is this didn't start out fully featured. We did this by identifying individual problems, like how many, maybe people in the US can't relate to this, but if you're in the UK, how many times have you sent out a PC or configured a PC and it's accidentally had the US keyboard format and it's switched the @ sign? How many of those have gone out in the wrong system locale, or potentially not activated, or missing antiviruses? In the case of MDT, which was mentioned in the chat, we wanted to make sure that every device, every PC or laptop that went out didn't have any missing drivers, or wasn't showing anything in the device manager that was actually out of date or missing a potential driver. So what you're seeing here, even making sure the date and time are accurate and have been set properly and the office is there and activated, it's not crashed, are just some ideas of how you can tie in individual things that are identified as problems for your business and then loop them back into an automation process that improves and improves over time. And the outcome of that, Dan, was every time that we sent out a new PC in my previous MSP, the quality was nearly 100% all of the time. And when it wasn't, we'd post-mortem why, and we'd come in and we'd make a check and add it on to this check so that we've learned from that in the future. So yeah, this is from my previous MSP in answer to the question that's in chat, but this is absolutely buildable in Ninja into a multi-line custom field. You absolutely could make it in Ninja.
This is a really good example too of saying we need a quality control script. We need a new computer script. All right, what's every idea we could possibly think of? And you'll get 50 ideas. We did something similar with a computer cleanup script. What do we want to include in this thing? Here's 20 things I wish this did. Awesome. I'm going to start with 2. I'm going to push it out today and talk about it, get the results, seek feedback, and continue to iterate. We were quickly iterating and putting out new things. Instead of taking a month and a half to deliver what's on screen, or 2 months, we were doing very basic stuff, proving it worked, gaining trust, and iterating and seeking feedback. So this is another great example of, get your big ideas all out there, but then start to understand, like, well, what do I actually want to get done in this first iteration? What's the minimum I could put into this to prove its viability? So I think this is an awesome thing, Gavin. Thank you for sharing that. I want to leave off on some final thoughts here. So I don't, for scripting, I don't think PowerShell's going away. It's not, and I highly recommend people invest in training for those that show an interest in PowerShell or automation or scripting in general. Highly recommend a book, PowerShell in a Month of Lunches. It's what it sounds like. It takes you through, hour-long lessons over the course of 30 lessons. And by the end of it, you'll be a decently competent PowerShell scripter to get things started and to create automations that perform valuable tasks. And then, Gavin, tell us about some of the communities we can navigate to also work as a great resource.
Sure, and I know we're running out of time now, but I would say that a lot of the things that I learned in automation were assisted and helped by the wider communities. And I think, Jonathan, if you just click onto the next one, we list some of these. So I'm one of the executive directors for MSP Geek. And when I started there, I knew very little about automation or PowerShell. Getting involved in those communities and going through this process with other people who are in the same situation as you, whether you're a seasoned scripter or just getting into it, is, I think, one of the best things that you could do to help get you along your journey faster. It's like a cheat code to automation. We're obviously the NinjaOne Discord, and I know there's a lot of people who were present in the Discord here today. Everyone supercharges each other, and I'm a big advocate for community. There's also the PowerShell Discord, and of course our NinjaOne dojo.
And thank you, Stephen, for dropping the links in there. You guys saw I was trying to grab it and be sneaky and then launch Discord on accident. We will get you links. We're also going to follow up after today. In addition to the recording, we'll make sure that there's links to any resources like this that you have available, including the slides too. Gavin, great point, and thank you for that. And Dan, going back to PowerShell training, I mean, couldn't have teed up the next session better. We actually have some free PowerShell training for folks, and I think this is a great first session to really lead into that. This is more from a strategic perspective and more of the why behind it, and now we get to really dive into, okay, let's get going. But before we do that, I've been, my responsibility was running this webinar. I want to go back actually and to this slide, because Dan, you mentioned like, okay, screenshot this, and I don't think I gave people a chance to see the monitoring section. So I just wanted to pause on this for a second in case anyone wants to grab a screenshot. But again, we will be sending out these slides after the event.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us, everyone. I hope you guys have a great rest of the event, and we'll try and keep an eye on the chat and reach out to us on our Discord.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Thank you, Dan.
See ya.